Welcome to the Sublated Art stream. Nina Power is not with me today. I'm Douglas Lain, the head of Sublation Media, author of the book Wave of Mutilation, and other short story collections and novels. And I'm in Colorado Springs, in my family home, but I got a new setup here, so I should be able to jump back into the saddle. I'm glad to be on the stream. So let's start in today. Today is it's gonna be about death. My father died about 11 days ago, and I felt like I wouldn't be able to talk about much else, but maybe I would be able to talk about the meaning of death in modern times. So, and Susanna Kleeman, to introduce yourself. Sorry.
I'm an author. I'm a novelist, author of the novel Twice and the upcoming Fatal Dating Tips from Sublation Media. And I'm really sorry that your dad died. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's one of these things when you're a content creator or whatever I am, where you have to balance out how much you want to talk about your personal life and how much you don't. You want to keep things private. So yes, my dad died. He had a bicycling accident. I'll just say that my great grandfather died around the same age while jumping over a fence. It was this is how the Lanes want to go out while active and doing their thing. My dad was a lifelong cyclist. So while I miss him terribly, it is not at all like the death that we're going to discuss today and the death of Ivan Ilitch. But I thought we might discuss that novella by Leo Tolstoy and just discuss how we all cope with, understand, face death in a modern context in our hyper real lives.
Right. My laptop is about to die, really unprofessionally. I'm just going to go and plug it in.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, while she does that, I'm going to play a song to get this get the show started. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to play a song, Susanna.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No trouble. Let me make sure I've got the got this. Hold on. I'm going to stop sharing. I want to make sure I have the audio going, because if you can't play a song that doesn't include the audio. So let's see. I'm usually better at this than this. Okay. Share screen. Audio's on. Yep. And
hello. Is that your dad's voice?
No.
Sit and wonder, sit and think why we're here and what this life is all about. Did you ever sit and ponder, sit and wonder, sit and think why we're here and what this life is all about? It's the problem that has driven many brainy men to drink. It's the weirdest thing they've tried to figure out. About 1,000 different theories the scientists can show, but never yet have proved a reason why. With all we've thought and all we're taught, why all we seem to know is we're born, live a while, then we die. Life's a very funny proposition after all. Imagination, jealousy, hypocrisy, love. 3 meals a day, a whole lot to say. When you haven't got the coin, you're always in the way. Everybody's fighting, we wend our way along. Every fellow claims the other fellow's in the wrong. Hurried and worried until we're buried, there's no curtain call. Life's a very funny proposition after all.
All right, so that's the song. So what do you make of that, Susanna Kleeman?
Well, I agree. Life's a very funny proposition, and we try to make some sense of it. And that you're even coming on this stream to talk about it all is a very heroic attempt to make sense of it, perhaps an attempt to get some control. Did you have conflicting feelings? Did you feel that is your desire to come on the stream and resume normal life? Is it a way to get some control over this funny proposition?
I think that it is, and I did have conflicting feelings about even doing a stream today, but I felt, I'd gone a good period of time without doing much of anything for Sublation, and it was time to do something, but I couldn't figure out what else to talk about. So yeah, maybe it was a ill-considered move, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But the other thing I wanted to start with, other than that song, which actually I had planned on putting at the end, was some Adorno.
Okay.
And then I want to give you an opportunity to respond to the Adorno and bring in your understanding from Baudrillard's point of view. So Adorno, in Negative Dialectics, wrote, "As the subjects live less, death grows more precipitous, more terrifying. The fact that it literally turns them into things makes them aware of reification, their permanent death, and the form of their relations that is partly their fault. The integration of death in civilization, a process without power over death, and a ridiculous cosmetic procedure in the face of death, is the shaping of a reaction to this social phenomenon, a clumsy attempt of the barter society to stop up the last holes left open by the world of merchandise. Death and history, particularly the collective history of the individual category, form a constellation. Once upon a time, the individual, Hamlet, inferred his absolute essentiality from the dawning awareness of the irrevocability of death. Now, the downfall of the individual brings the entire construction of bourgeois existence down with it. What is destroyed is a non-entity, in itself and perhaps even for itself. Hence, the constant panic in view of death, a panic not to be quelled anymore except by repressing the thought of death. Death as such, or as a primal biological phenomenon, is not to be extracted from the convolutions of history. For that, the individual, as the carrier of the experience of death, is far too much of a historical category. The statement that death is always the same is as abstract as it is untrue. The manner of people's coming to terms with death varies all the way into their physical side, along with the concrete conditions of their dying."
Yeah, big stuff. Big stuff. What is he saying there? He's saying that death, that there's been a death of death, that our modern culture, our modernity, is in part a massive attempt to try, in the first instance, to control death. And it should be said, that's been done to some degree, right? We live longer now. We have better doctors, we have imaging, we have medicines, we can live longer. But what he's saying is the price of that living longer is firstly a culture that can forget about death and can try to block out death with the purchasing of many things. And in fact, our culture as a culture doesn't want to talk about death, wants to talk about youth. And then also that death changes. That's a very amazing bit in the bit that you just read, that death is never the same. And in earlier cultures where, in fact, in reading the Tolstoy short story that we're going to discuss, I noticed with what casualness they talk about the husband and wife had some kids, had quite a few kids, 2 of them died, that's how it was in everybody's family, more or less, unless you were very, very lucky. Kids, you had many kids, some of them died. death was a more normalized thing, something that you ran into every day, but that's not true anymore. I wonder to what degree, again, I do not want to talk too much about your personal situation, and you just say to me, enough, if that's what it is. But I wonder here, your dad died in a very shocking and sudden way. He wasn't long-term ill. And
No.
there's many good and things that are the result of that. But that just came out of the blue, and that must have, in its first instance, been petrifying just to be confronted with death, because I guess death isn't something that you think about very much.
Oh, well, that's where you're wrong. I think about death all the time.
Do you?
I'm like,
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I have a long-term relationship with my fear of death. And I got it from my father as well. We can talk about that a little bit, but I want to point out something about the Adorno. You covered it well, but there was something in here that I think is easy to miss. And it has to do with the line about Hamlet and the barter society. So the notion, the transformation of society into a bourgeois society, one based on individual freedom, is, took a long while to fully develop. And Adorno was saying in the time of Shakespeare, death had a different character than it does today. That has kind of been reversed. That for Hamlet, the fact of his own mortality actually made his own life and his own character seem more essential. There was no divine authority that was going to lend authenticity or meaning to the decisions he made, but rather the choice to live was one he made for himself, and that he did that with the full knowledge of it being a temporary life. And that actually, according to Adorno, made Hamlet, more buttressed in his individuality and his personality than he would have been otherwise. Whereas today, the opposite is true. And Adorno is pointing out to how the flattening out of meaning is not just a product of the loss of the divine or the religious order, but also the consequence of the rise of the barter society, the flattening out of meaning into abstraction, the reification of society, the fact that our social relationships happen behind our backs for the most part, between things rather than between people. So this is a Marxist accounting of the way in which death has become a major problem in bourgeois society. And that's the explanation for why there's a suppression of death today, that we don't have room to make much sense of death today.
So help me out. What precisely does he mean here by the barter society?
Well, a society where what matters most is the value that you can that sets up exchange, and so that the way in which our decisions about what kinds of lives we're going to have are made automatically through the market based on a certain form of production, where it appears as though the wheat in America is having a relationship with the technology in Japan, rather than the people in Japan are having a social relationship with the workers in the United States.
But that's only true in a certain sphere, isn't it? That's not completely true all the time. The arrangement, and we've talked about this before, but for me, the arrangement of the world simply into production, that's not the full story. We also still have perverse, secret, private sides. It is still possible, although in a diminishing way, because so much of what was once private has become public, even if we still think it's private, by us displaying ourselves, to the world in situations like this on social media. But there are still places. It's not just as simple as the world of production. I mean, I heard that in the Adorno, and I heard it slightly differently, and it drove me back to the death of Ivan Ilitch that we're here to talk about, which is, in fact, the argument is sort of saying we're all kind of dead already. What does it mean to live? What does it mean to be alive? To be alive, according to Ivan Ilitch in the story that we both read and came to talk about today, it's only at the point of his dying that he comes to realize that his whole life, so properly lived, correctly done, with the right friends, in the right profession, marrying someone he doesn't particularly love, but who looks right and is right and good in his social situation, the nodding along, the deadening of ourselves that we do, his memories when he looks back and he's at his point of death are wonderful memories of childhood, of a particular prune that he ate, of fun at law school, maybe sometimes when he went out drinking. But all that slowly, as he puts on the mask that is required of us, the mask of being a good bourgeois citizen, the mask of being a judge, of being a lawyer, the mask of whose only real outlet, it seems in that story, is going to play games of whist, card games for money with friends, where there's a sense of living. And he comes to realize, oh my God, I've wasted my life. I have been dead. It's only now that I realize that I've been dead that I am alive. And so for me, also it's got to be said, Hamlet may be, he may have a more strong sense of himself and all those people who sat around with skulls on their desks, but he's not necessarily living the high life, old Hamlet, is he? He's living, he's very aware of death, dying, the death of his father causing him to have these reflections, but he's on an absolutely punitive, deadly mission, isn't he? He's not skipping amongst the daisies and eating the delicious prunes, is he? So Hamlet's, for me, not a perfect example of what might be done here, and in any case is only a character in a play, right?
Right, that's true. I would point out that just to go back to Adorno for a second, what you described is here in the Adorno. He starts the whole thing by saying, as the subjects live less, death grows more precipitous, more terrifying.
It does, because it's entirely possible to have lived a very materially comfortable life with all the ostensible trappings and a full family photo book and a CV, and still not have lived. And when you realize that, that's utterly petrifying. That is more frightening than death itself in the story and in reality. So what about you? Are you living a dead life of bourgeoisie and not fully experiencing the world as it is? Or are you living a life entirely mediated behind screens and your various sublation media, whatever's, and is that yet another form of not actually living life, but living it in a second life?
I worry that I will get to, 20, 25 years or so, I will get to a point where I will be like Ivan Ilitch and say, how is this happening? Did I live the wrong way? This is a real concern. And
you've got a slightly different life to Ivan Ilitch. You haven't gone down the full civil servant, lawyer, prosecutor. You're wearing a suit, but you're not wearing.
I'm not really. I'm wearing a Zizek t-shirt.
Okay, so you're wearing the suit with the Zizek t-shirt. So you haven't entirely conformed to what other people have told you is okay for other people who are good middle class people. You haven't done that. You haven't entirely falsified your life. You're Doug Lain of Sublation Media. So there's that to be said for you, right?
Right. I mean, I don't think anyone says to themselves, okay, to get along, I'm going to falsify my life and conform, right? I think that what people do is they find ways to accommodate themselves to this life that feels like it's what they want and that's what they really are. And I don't think Ivan Ilitch, I guess Ivan Ilitch might be an extreme example of someone who was maybe consciously making some choices that he knew weren't fitting in with his desires. But I think today we're in the unfortunate positions where we can conform even as we apparently act out our desires.
We absolutely definitely can. Baudrillard says something amazing. He says, it's not enough to be born. You have to be born twice. You have to be born into the milieu, into the culture that you're born into, your family life, your identity is whatever your identity is. He says, but it is incumbent that you have to die and be born again. And he calls it, I think, something like anastic parents. you need to find anastic parents who will rebirth you. What he means by those anastic parents is someone you've read, someone who says something, some access you have. It could be a teacher, could be somebody you know. It's usually somebody older, but it doesn't have to be directly so. It can be through a film, it can be through something, but you have to have something that splits your head apart and makes you be born again. But the process of being born again means rejecting absolutely everything that you came to up until that point. And you can be born again at any time, but he says you have not lived life until you have died once, culturally, socially, completely, and then been born again. And that means questioning absolutely everything. It means questioning, are you a man? Are you a Marxist? All the things that brought you, where there was a pattern of your life that brought you up to a certain point, all of it has to be destroyed, and then you have to be born again. So has that happened for you?
No. Although I did go when I was a teenager, I went to, it's funny, a friend that I knew since grade school reached out to me since this happened. And she was someone whose birthday party I went to in like 1987 or so, 86, I think. And when I got there, I found out that it wasn't her actual birthday. It was her rebirth day. She was a born again Christian. So she was celebrating 1 year as a born again Christian, and I'd been invited. And I was, let's just say, extremely skeptical of the whole affair. But it does strike me that, born again Christianity and what you're talking about seems very similar. It's a very Christian notion, reject your father and mother, give away all your worldly possessions, give away now your very sense of identity and history, and follow Christ. That's
well, I wasn't fully saying that you should follow Christ, and I note that
I know you weren't saying that, but it is, that last, you've said everything but that last bit.
Okay, but this, and I see that you're bridling here what I've said to you. So I've clearly,
no, not really.
Clearly pressed the button. This kind of being born again means you have to say, I am not a woman. I am not a man. I am not an American. I am not anything. I am nothing. I'm absolutely nothing. Every single thing is baggage, apart from the fact that one day I will die. Nothing, 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 apart from the joyous fact that one day I will die. And I've been gifted to be here. Therefore, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? But it requires the complete divestiture of everything, of absolutely everything. Is that what your friend did? And when she must have been, I'm doing my calculations, 16 or 17 at the time. Had she said, I'm not American, I'm not a woman? Had she done all of that?
No, she said no, because following Christ in Colorado Springs in 1987 did not give you the option to say something as crazy as I'm not a woman, and certainly not, I'm not American. This is a very American Christianity. You got to understand.
So by my standards, this person was not born again. So sorry.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
She's watching, but that's just my humble opinion.
Yeah. Well, I want to show another clip that I set up. I'm not sure if it really fits, but I feel like it does, or there's some echo of what you're saying in this clip with Rick Roderick on the postmodern condition. So this is beyond just the bourgeois condition. This is, far regressed from Tolstoy. But let's see if I can get this to work this time. Here it is. Okay. And I'm going to mute myself.
Well, if that's what nihilists were, there wouldn't be any, and that's not what we're diagnosing. We're diagnosing a nihilistic culture where no enduring beliefs can provide meaning for the overwhelming majority of members of that culture. That's the problem that Nietzsche identifies coming along with modern life. And also not coming along as a mystification, but coming along as part of the inside of modern life. Comes along with Darwin. In other words, being demystified about our origins. It comes along with a new view of the cosmos, being demystified about the importance of the earth. You know, where it is and how big it is and in the center of what. Being demystified concerning a whole series of things about which earlier there were powerful, important, meaning-giving myths. Part of the work of the Enlightenment was this destructive work of destroying myths. That was the work carried out by the bourgeois class and by its ideologues. It's not bad. I mean, you remember they said we will have a decent world to live in until the last priest is hung on the guts of the last king and stuff. I mean, those are the mottos of the great revolutions. This is Washington, D.C., right? These are the great bourgeois revolutions. We love them, and they may be, in fact, a world historic destiny. Nietzsche's worry was that this kind of demystification, without creating new festivals, new games, new myths, would lead to a situation in which human beings willed only not to will any longer, who wanted sort of only not to want any longer. And Nietzsche saw this emerging culture as one that would be inimical to human life, about which, as I said, he doesn't have a lot of consoling things to say. So I'm gonna read a little passage of Nietzsche and try to stop there to give us a frame within which Nietzsche views human beings. Now, I don't think this is all that theoretic, and I don't want it to be. I want it to be something that you can grab a hold of and understand, because this is kind of a modern myth I'm about to spell out for you. In fact, I may not read it. I may just gloss it. It's a modern myth that I'd like to spell out for you that many of us believe. And let's see, after we've examined this myth, if this is more or less comforting than the beautiful myth of redemption in, say, for example, the Bible. The myth is something like this. There are billions and billions of stars. The earth is a tiny one. We crawl across it for just a few seconds, and then we individually are gone. Billions and billions of eons of time before and billions afterwards pass. And the earth eventually goes out like a cinder, and perhaps the whole universe collapses into itself. And after all that's happened, absolutely nothing will have been done. Now, that's a very important myth. Many of us believe that one too. But against that background, it becomes difficult as we chip away at our daily little lives, selling shoes, selling tires, teaching class, to try to find any damn thing that means anything. So our search through Nietzsche will not be a search for dogmatic answers to that question, but to follow his quest and ours for a form of self-creation under circumstances and with a background of myths that do not make it seem likely that we will have a happy result. So the end of my first lecture is that our interpretive efforts here too are bound to fail.
So, do you think that I was saying that by dying twice, there is no meaning in the world? Is that what you think I was saying?
No, I do think though that I could twist what you're saying into. Let me think of how I could say this more directly, or unless without condemning myself quite so much. I think that there is a kind of nihilism at work in contemporary society or in modernity that allows for this notion of throwing everything away, including your sense of self, and starting again. That he pointed out, Roderick pointed it out in that little clip from his lecture, that on the one hand, the opening up of the space for myth making or meaning, is a kind of develops our freedom. It is one of the aims of the bourgeois revolution, to cast aside God and the old order based on religious power. But the difficulty has become that we have ended up with a myth like Carl Sagan's myth of the cosmos is a random explosion that spreads out across time and space, seemingly infinitely, but actually in a temporary way, where human lives are not different than the life of a worm, and one where we have a great deal of difficulty in our daily lives maintaining a sense of meaning. And I do think maintaining a sense of our history and itself, and even I'd say our personality, is a step towards meaning rather than a step away. That I do feel like one of the things I faced as I went through the process of dealing with a funeral home was how this person who was my father, was a very individual person, had become a thing, a problem to be handled by, an industry. And when I saw his body, I realized he wasn't there anymore, and he really had become a thing, unrecognizable. And so I'm sent into this questioning of like, how do we maintain meaning when the things that we have to stand on, Hamlet's, individuality, have not only been evaporated at death, but in some ways are fading or have faded away even as we live.
Wow. Well, what I profoundly think is that, that true death would be to think that you could analyze and pin down absolutely everything. And, not death, life, pleasure is the knowledge that you cannot pin down absolutely everything, that our science cannot know everything, that it's not possible for that, and that the mystery continues. I completely and profoundly believe that the mystery continues, no matter what we say. I also think you're very down on worms. Who's to say that a worm isn't having the most epic metaphysical time? Who knows what a worm senses and feels? Perhaps it's an endless array of natural beauty, light, sound, rustling, the most delicious morsels of soil. I really think that there's many ways of seeing this perspective. In listening to Roderick there, I was also reminded, have you read the Arthur C. Clarke story? I can't remember what it's called, but it is about some Tibetan monks whose challenge is to say out loud every single word of every single book in their vast library. And when they do that, they believe that all the stars will go out and life will end. Do you know this story? And
I think I may have read it. Yeah.
Well, what they do is it's taking them a long time. So they hire in some technicians from IBM to arrive, to come up to their monastery in Tibet and come and do the process for them. And these guys do it. They don't believe that this is what's going to happen. But as they leave the monastery, all the lights, all the stars go out. But again, that's a very hubristic fantasy, which would seem to indicate that we have some control over the stars or anything like that. I don't think it's remotely nihilistic to say that you should be born twice, and that what you need to do is to throw everything away, because I think what that allows you to do is throw away the imprisoning lies that are stopping you from having clarity about one's true situation in the world, which is an absolutely crazy one, and instead allows you therefore to you can put all those things back on into you, but you have to have questioned every single one of them. You have to have held it out, as it were, as something that was imposed on you either by your body or by the society that you were born in. You have to throw it, and then it's like doing the Marie Kondo exercise, the Japanese cleansing superstar. So you put all your possessions in the room on the floor, you empty everything out, and one by one, does it give you joy, Doug? Does it give you joy? But I absolutely do not believe that one has to. It's not, what I'm saying is absolutely not that you have to reduce it all down to, well, we know nothing, science shows us that we're nothing, we're all nothing, we should accept that we're nothing. It's not that. What I'm saying is it's important to be reborn by divesting yourself of all elements of cultural baggage. So if Ivan Ilitch in the story had allowed himself earlier than he does the moment of rebirth, he would have left his wife in the marriage that he doesn't like. He would have quit his job where he was feeling superior to everybody, but had, as he says, nothing vital in it whatsoever, could only learn to be an absolute cold, incorruptible judge and feel very proud of it. He would have, because he'd had his doubts about it, he would have chucked it all away and, I don't know, gone and been a bagpiper, and I don't know what he would have done, but it would at least have given him the freedom and the opportunity to do that. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. Someone earlier, Rudy, actually, I think said that if you're working class, you just have to do what is set in front of you to do.
Yeah, I have to say that's just a lie. Yes, you do, but does that mean that working class people do not have an inner life? They do not have individual takes on things that they cannot have. You know, yes, but I would say that is a profoundly patronizing argument, because what it says is people are just the situation they're born into. They don't have a brain. They're not able to think askance. They're not able to, you know, open the door, go somewhere else, do something else with their head, even if they're in economic deprivation. I really think that's a profoundly patronizing, you know, commiseration, the essence of racism and sexism. I think that's a quote from Baudrillard.
The other day, I was talking to Spencer Leonard about, I can't even remember what we were actually talking about, but I brought up an old 1970s television show called Barney Miller.
Uh-huh.
And it was a cop show, started in 75, ended in 82, I think, or 83. And my father liked it. He didn't, it wasn't like his favorite show, but he thought it was a decent show. I won't, well, I'll tell a little anecdote. I had a friend over, we were sitting on the couch, flipping through the channels, trying to find something to watch. And we flipped, and it was driving my father crazy. And he says, why don't you just settle on something? And I said, there's nothing on. And he said, you flip past Barney Miller. Barney Miller's a great show. Watch Barney Miller. So since he died, I've been watching Barney Miller. And I watched an episode last night about a mortician comes in to complain of an assault and a theft. And what's happened is a man has come in with his friend who had died, his roommate, and an old man with his old roommate, and they'd been living together since their wives died, and his friend had died, and he couldn't afford the funeral home's services, so he hit him over the head and stole his friend's body away, and he buried him in Central Park, turns out, on his own. But you know, the police intervene. Abe Vigoda, the oldest of the cops, talks some sense into this man, gets the location of the body, and the city takes care of the body, digs him up and takes care of him in the proper way. And my point is, there are times, like for instance around death, where the force of all of society is greater than your inner life, you know. And this man, there was some dignity to this show, right? They depicted this man who had stolen his friend's dead body as kind of a noble figure, but nonetheless, in the end, the humanized bureaucracy in the figure of Barney Miller wins the day, even as each figure in the show feels diminished by their role, and kind of haggard and put upon by being cops. So, and I think when it comes to working class people, they have to do what's set in front of them. The truth is that the capitalist class is just the same.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. We can kid ourselves otherwise, but exactly. And okay.
No, go on, say more.
No, I was going to talk about dead bodies, and then I thought, you know what, I'm not going to talk about dead bodies. I'm just going to leave it there. But I would say that you know, as that a danger is maybe that we think that is not the case for us, and we think that we are so free, and we think that we're not living the life of Ivan Ilitch, only realizing at the point of death that it's entirely wasted. We think that we're free. We think that we make our choices, that we're able to decide this and decide that for ourselves. But it's still within a very narrow rubric, even if it doesn't seem so, even if it feels that we live in our obscene age of everything being permitted. Is everything really permitted? No, I don't think it is. Only certain things that you can see on screens are permitted, you know, vast revolutions in completely different ways, and not having screens, well, that's not permitted. So we can very much fall into the trap. It's like that. I often think of the internet a bit like the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang with the sweeties leading the children into the prison. You can sit in the prison thinking you're free as you like and living your totally free and wonderful life, but it's even harder, I would suggest, for all of us these days to be able to distinguish what is, a free and authentic life and what isn't. And that, for me, in my humble and personal opinion, what is a free and authentic life is questioning everything, is the freedom to question everything, the freedom to laugh at anything, the freedom to give a big raspberry to anything that comes down off the mountain with its tablets to tell you this is the solution and this is how it should be, whether or not it seems totally, with the very best intentions whatsoever. And so many things do come to us these days, supposedly with the very best of intentions, to help to teach up poor brains about how to do and what to do. And I have to say, to go back to it, I really think it is an incredibly imprisoning thing to say that one's class position, that the suggestion that some people in some classes can think freely and other people in other classes can't think freely. Hogwash. I do think that.
Well, I think it's important to note, like, the start of this conversation was, and we should get to it now that we're about 45 minutes in, a bit more. I have an excerpt I want to read from The Death of Ivan Ilitch, but the start of this conversation was not about contrasting working class people to people like Ivan Ilitch, who are bourgeois subjects, right? But rather the way in which Ivan Ilitch discovered his conformity, the feeling that he had lived his life wrongly, that there was something that had gone amiss, and that perhaps that was the explanation for the misery of his death, not just the pain, the physical pain of it, but the mental anguish, right?
Lies, as he keeps saying.
Right. Yes. And so Rudy said, well, working class people simply will, they do what they have to do to survive, and they're maybe perhaps less likely to get to the end of their life and feel that they've lived their life wrongly, but not because they don't have self-reflection, but because when they reflect, they don't see very many moments where much of a choice was open to them. But I think that was what Rudy was saying. But I think fundamentally that's not true, because working class people make decisions on where they're going to work and how they're going to work and what kind of contracts they're going to accept.
And who they are and how they behave and what their morality is.
Yeah, but all those things are intertwined. Like if you decide to be a mortician, that's a working class job. That is also going to be a reflection of who you are. If you decide to be a cop, that's a working class job as well.
But are you going to be a good cop or a bad cop? I'm sorry. It's not just about, yes, there may be no choice. There may be a limited run of choices in your position, in your job that you're going to have. But how are you going to do that job? I'm so sorry. I disagree.
Another episode of Barney Miller I saw was one where one of the cops, a comedic character most of the time, sent out to assist as a bank robbery is going on. And he ends up being a hero, going into the bank and shooting the robbers. And afterwards, he's a wreck. He can't really live with himself. He can't believe what he's done. He doesn't. They're offering him a medal, which he finds to be not just like offensive, but absurd. And the fact is that he was a good cop, but he was now a murderer as well. And you have to reflect on whether or not there was another option than what he did. He ends up not getting the medal. Somebody who saved a family and a cat from a fire got the medal instead. But I'm just saying that being a good cop or a bad cop, there are maybe distinctions to be drawn there. But on the other hand, maybe those distinctions are also continuities between the two positions. And in an interrogation, the good cop and the bad cop cooperate together to extract the information. So
Okay, but there are deeper levels than just being the kind of good cop, bad cop that you're talking about here. There are profounder levels, you know, where you can be a highly philosophical cop or not. But you know, I think every single human being has a capacity, if they know, you know, they have a capacity to just, even if to think, this is not a good situation, I don't like this doesn't feel good to me, you know, whether or not, doesn't matter what social class they're in. And well, I mean, it is definitely a true argument that people who have more wealth, are born into more wealth, and have an experience of more agency, may be more able to act on and say, this doesn't feel right to me, so I'm going to do X. But it's also completely untrue also. You know, if you're a bourgeois person born into some middle class life, it may be very hard indeed to being told you've got to go to university, you've got to do this, you've got to get your house, you've got to do this. The pressure of saying, all that feels completely wrong to me and I want to run away and join the circus may be as overwhelming as the other. And I'm not airy-fairy in saying this. I profoundly believe it. Also, what about revolutions? You know, does that, by your logic, no, there could be no working class revolution because working class people would just be born into their situation and then they would not have the agency or, you know, to think different or to imagine that it's possible for the world to be different. Surely, Dan.
Well, see, this is the thing. When we think about working class people today, we're thinking about a working class that is not self-organized, not a class for itself. I think, but rather a class that's for capital. And that's been kind of the life experience of most people around today. Certainly, it's been the way I understood the working class my whole life. You know, as I looked for work, but I do think that there is another option, and that it would have to be based on partly on the self-reflection of working people, and that other option is, well, it's in the Campaign for a Socialist Party. It's the idea that the individual workers will come together to organize independently of the political powers in society now, to buttress their own individual and collective subjectivity, to develop a way to not only decide individually what feels like the right way to live, but to decide collectively what will create the conditions for that kind of life. And so, you know, I do think sometimes I wrestle with whether or not there's some, like, the problem of death after modernity might be something that even a socialist revolution, where the true freedom of everyone and you know, developed by the working class, there may be that kind of problem isn't something that even freedom, real freedom and self-responsibility would overcome. And that's sort of what I'm trying to wrestle with as I slip away from my personal situation and try to think about things on a societal level. But can we read this Ivan Ilitch section? I've got a section from the death of Ivan Ilitch. Let's see. Another fortnight passed. Ivan Ilitch now no longer left his sofa. He would not lie in bed, but lay on the sofa, facing the wall nearly all the time. He suffered ever the same unceasing agonies, and in his loneliness pondered always the same insoluble question. What is this? Can it be that it is death? And the inner voice answered, yes, it is death. Why these sufferings? And the voice answered, for no reason. They just are so. Beyond and besides this, there was nothing. From the very beginning of his illness, ever since he had first been to see the doctor, Ivan Ilitch's life had been divided between two contrary and alternating moods. Now it was despair and the expectation of this uncomprehended and terrible death, and now hope and an intently interested observation of the functioning of his organs. Now before his eyes there was only a kidney or an intestine that temporarily evaded its duty, and now only that incomprehensible and dreadful death from which it was impossible to escape. These two states of mind had alternated from the very beginning of his illness, but the further it progressed, the more doubtful and fantastic became the conception of the kidney, and the more real the sense of impending death. He had to call to mind what he had been 3 months before and what he was now, to call to mind with what regularity he had been going downhill for every possibility of hope to be shattered. Latterly, during the loneliness in which he found himself as he lay facing the back of the sofa, a loneliness in the midst of a populous town and surrounded by numerous acquaintances and relations, but that yet could not have been more complete anywhere, either at the bottom of the sea or under the earth. During that terrible loneliness, Ivan Ilitch had lived only in memories of the past. Pictures of his past rose before him, one after another. They always began with what was nearest in time and then went back to what was most remote, to his childhood, and rested there. If he thought of the stewed prunes that had been offered him that day, his mind went back to the raw, shriveled French plums of his childhood, their peculiar flavor and the flow of saliva when he sucked their stones. And along with the memory of that taste came a whole series of memories of those days. His nurse, his brother, and their toys. No, I mustn't think of that. It is too painful, Ivan Ilitch said to himself, and brought himself back to the present, to the button on the back of the sofa and the creases in its morocco. Morocco is expensive, but it does not wear well. There had been a quarrel about it. It was a different kind of quarrel and a different kind of morocco that time when we tore father's portfolio and were punished, and Mama brought us some tarts, and again his thought dwelt on his childhood, and again it was painful, and he tried to banish them and fix his mind on something else. Then again, together with that chain of memories, another series passed through his mind of how his illness had progressed and grown worse. There also, the further back he looked, the more life there had been. There had been more of what was good in life and more of life itself. The two merged together. Just as the pain went on getting worse and worse, so my life grew worse and worse, he thought. There is one bright spot there at the back, at the very beginning of life, and afterwards all becomes blacker and blacker and proceeds more and more rapidly, in inverse ratio to the square of the distance from death, thought Ivan Ilitch. And the example of the stone falling downwards with increasing velocity entered his mind. Life, a series of increasing sufferings, flies further and further towards its end, the most terrible suffering. I am flying, he shuddered, shifted himself and tried to resist, but was already aware that resistance was impossible. And again, with eyes weary of gazing, but unable to cease seeing what was before them, he stared at the back of the sofa and waited, awaiting that dreadful fall and shock of destruction. Resistance is impossible, he said to himself. If I could only understand what it is all for, but that too is impossible. An explanation would be possible if it could be said that I have not lived as I ought to, but it's impossible to say that. And he remembered all the legality, correctitude, and propriety of his life, that at any rate can certainly not be admitted, he thought, and his lips smiled ironically as if someone could see that smile and be taken in by it. There is no explanation. Agony, death, what for?
Yes, but then a little bit after that, he does understand something. I think it's not fair to leave your viewers with that incredibly pessimistic, incredibly, So do you want to say what is it that
you say, Susanna? You summarize that, paraphrase that section. I mean, I could go to it, I suppose, but
you've gone for his darkness. He says that there's nothing, but what the story shows is there is something at the end. By him understanding that what really is hurting him isn't so much his disease, but the lies that surround it, the fake faces of those nearest and dearest to him, the falseness of everybody. Oh, you're just a little bit ill. Everyone being, apart from him, avoiding the issue of death. He says the lies. What hurts is not death. It is the lies. That is what I took from that story. And at the moment of his death, when he profoundly accepts, I am dying, and also when very touchingly, when his son comes, his son is about 14, comes and just sits with him, and his son's a peripheral character, but sits with him and has tears in his eyes, and his son gives him human emotion. That makes things okay. Death is awful. La Rochefoucauld says neither death nor the sun can be stared at directly. One doesn't want to stare at it directly, but one may never be able to understand anything or to halt it. But if one does not live in lies, then one does not come to the place of complete despair that you've just described in the passage that you've read, that it is the realization of the lies, not the realization of the death, that is so awful.
Well, should I read the ending? Should I spoil it?
Yeah.
Okay. From that moment, the screaming began that continued for 3 days and was so terrible that one could not hear it through the two closed doors without horror. At the moment he answered, his wife realized that he was lost, that there was no return, that the end had come, the very end, and his doubts were still unsolved and remained doubts. Oh, 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 he cried in various intonations. He had begun by screaming, I won't, and continued screaming the letter O. For 3 whole days, during which time did not exist for him, he struggled in that black sack into which he was being thrust by an invisible, resistless force. He struggled as a man condemned to death struggles in the hands of the executioner, knowing that he cannot save himself. And every moment he felt that, despite all his efforts, he was drawing nearer and nearer to what terrified him. He felt that his agony was due to his being thrust into that black hole, and still more to his not being able to get right into it. He was hindered from getting into it by his conviction that his life had been a good one. That very justification of his life held him fast and prevented his moving forward, and it caused the most torment of all. Suddenly, some force struck him in the chest and side, making it still harder to breathe, and he fell through the hole, and there at the bottom was a light. What had happened to him was like the sensation one sometimes experiences in a railway carriage when one thinks one is going backwards while one is really going forwards and suddenly becomes aware of the real direction. Yes, it was not the right thing, he said to himself, but that's no matter. It can be done. But what is the right thing? He asked himself, and suddenly grew quiet. This occurred at the end of the 3rd day, 2 hours before his death. Just then his schoolboy son had crept softly in and gone up to the bedside. The dying man was still screaming desperately and waving his arms. His hand fell on the boy's head. The boy caught it, pressed it to his lips, and began to cry. At that very moment, Ivan Ilitch fell through and caught sight of the light, and it was revealed to him that though his life had not been what it should have been, this could still be rectified. He asked himself, what is the right thing? And grew still, listening. Then he felt that someone was kissing his hand. He opened his eyes, looked at his son, and felt sorry for him. His wife came up to him, and he glanced at her. She was gazing at him open-mouthed, with undried tears on her nose and cheek, and a despairing look on her face. He felt sorry for her too. Yes, I am making them wretched, he thought. They are sorry, but it will be better for them when I die. He wished to say this, but had not the strength to utter it. Besides, why speak? I must act, he thought. With a look at his wife, he indicated his son and said, take him away. Sorry for him. Sorry for you too. He tried to add, forgive me, but said, forego, and waved his hand, knowing that he whose understanding mattered would understand. And suddenly it grew clear to him that what had been oppressing him and would not leave him was all dropping away at once from 2 sides, from 10 sides, and from all sides. He was sorry for them. He must act so as not to hurt them, release them, and free himself from these sufferings. How good, how simple, he thought. And the pain, he asked himself, what has become of it? Where are you, pain? He turned his attention to it. Yes, here it is. Well, what of it? Let the pain be. And death, where is it? He sought his former accustomed fear of death and did not find it. Where is it? What death? There was no fear because there was no death. In place of death, there was light. So that's what it is, he suddenly exclaimed aloud. What joy! To him, all this happened in a single instant, and the meaning of that instant did not change. For those present, his agony continued for another 2 hours. Something rattled in his throat. His emaciated body twitched, and then the grasping and rattle became less and less frequent. It is finished, said someone near him. He heard these words and repeated them in his soul. Death is finished, he said to himself. It is no more. He drew in a breath, stopped in the midst of a sigh, stretched out, and died.
So maybe the story, which is called The Death of Ivan Ilitch, is really about his previous death, the deadly life he was living. And his death stops at the moment where he has profound clarity and accepts the truth of the situation he's in. The situation he's in is the situation of being about to die. But we could all, it suggests, have access to that if we could all accept the truth about the situation we're in. And it seems to say to me, when you accept the absolute truth of the situation you are in, inconvenient as it may be, then you are not dead.
I feel as though that you can't overlook the Christian moral, the Christian message of the death of Ivan Ilitch, and that while I don't disagree with that your interpretation, I do wonder about how such a story could be written now without by a non-Christian, by someone who was not developing his own idiosyncratic form of Christianity and espousing it like Tolstoy was.
It couldn't be written, I agree, it couldn't be written that way about somebody on the point of death, but it could be about one's dead life and the ending of that dead life and a different life beginning that is about seeing things as they are, not how you would like them to be, which is
right.
what causes all pain.
Which goes back to the Adorno, which is we can imagine changing our lives and not leading dead lives, but it is harder and harder to really fathom death.
It absolutely is, because of material conditions and because of the tremendous woo-woo lie of the internet that seems to tell us lots of things without telling us anything. But it is not impossible, and that is the joy of life. It's not impossible. To question everything is not impossible. That is the place. That's what makes it okay.
All right. Well, thank you. This was a helpful conversation for me. I hope people got something out of it. It was more of a collage of ideas than it was any kind of fully worked out, argument for anything. But I feel good about having done it. And I just want to say I do miss my dad.
I'm really
and
sorry.
leave it there. So see you guys.